Okay, so it looks like we're now live streaming on YouTube. So I'll just repeat again. We had some technical difficulties earlier. The wrong link was posted on the website. We've corrected that link and we've waited about 15 minutes here to make sure other people have plenty of time to join in. We'll also leave the record open on the public hearings for 30 days following this meeting, so anybody can submit in writing any comments if they were unable to be heard this evening because of the technical difficulties. I have consulted with our town attorney and we are okay in terms of meeting all of the noticing requirements to move forward on all of our items on the agenda tonight. Again, if you're just joining, please hit the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Let us know if you're an applicant or a member of the community who would like to speak, and let us know which application you'd like to speak on if it's listed as a public hearing. Time is limited to 3 minutes. We'll let you know when you're getting close to the 3 minutes. That is for members of the community to speak at 3 minutes. If you're on the phone, not to worry. We'll let you know during that public hearing that there's an option for you to hit *9 on your phone then, and we will go ahead and allow you to speak during that. So we'll start now. Welcome to Town of Islip, Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020, Planning Board meeting. The first order of business, I just want to take roll call of what Planning Board members are here. Mr. Brown?
Present.
Mr. Frugieri? Mr. Frugieri, you?
Sorry, I was muted. Present.
All right, you're muted.
Thank you. Mr. Bruno?
Here.
Mr. Moriarty?
Present.
Ms. Prude?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Mattamore?
Here.
And Mr. Friedland's here, so we have full attendance. Okay, item 1 on the agenda. Planning Board public hearing item is adjourned. It's Farouk Realty LLC. If you're here for item number 1, please be advised it has been adjourned. Also, if you're here for item number 7 on the agenda, Town Board application recommendation item, Rover 2014 LLC, that one also has been adjourned. They will not be heard this evening. Okay, so our first item on the agenda, Planning Board public hearing, Q Bayshore, PB 2020-011, northeast corner of Montauk Highway, State Route 27A and Fordham Place, Bayshore, 331 Montauk Highway. Applicant requests a Planning Board special permit for a restaurant in the Business 1 District pursuant to 68-272.1G. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of this application. Good evening. Is the applicant here?
Yes.
Can I ask if you're not speaking, to make sure your microphones are muted? Is the applicant here?
Yes, I am, sir.
Go ahead when you're ready, applicant.
Okay, the subject property is located at 331 East Main Street in Bayshore. It's located on the northeast corner of Montauk Highway and Fordham Place. It's 17,891 square feet and it's zoned Business 1. It's presently improved with a 3,014 square foot building. And there was a site plan for this site that was approved in August of 2017. Most of the site work in connection with that site plan has been completed. The only thing that doesn't appear to have been done at this point is the plantings along the northern property line. I've spoken to my client about that, and he's going to adhere to the prior approval, and he's going to install those plantings. The application tonight seeks modification, special permit parking waiver to convert what was approved as a market into a Qdoba Mexican Eats restaurant. If you're not familiar with Qdoba, it's a fast casual restaurant specializing in Mexican food such as burritos, tacos, Mexican salads, and the food is made fresh in front of the customers. It's similar to the way a lot of the burger places that have come out over the last few years work, where you get to pick your toppings and the different parts of your salad. I think the biggest issue here, the board has approved restaurants up and down Montauk Highway in this area. There's a Burger King just to the east of us, and there's a number of restaurants to the west. I think the biggest issue is the parking waiver that we're seeking. The town has three metrics that they use to measure parking. One is based on the number of seats, one is based on the square footage, and the other is based on occupancy load. We are proposing 44 seats for this restaurant. The 44 seats, that would yield 22 parking spaces. That would require 22 parking spaces, which is exactly what's provided on site. If we went by occupancy load, based on my engineer and architect's calculations, they determined that 17 spaces would be required. Since the higher of the number is the square footage of the building, 1 per 100, we're required to have 31 spaces. We only have 22, so it's about a 29% reduction in the required parking. These requirements are based on traditional restaurants where you have waiting areas and bars, where you have people waiting for tables, and there's a longer turnaround time for these uses. This particular use, the average wait time from entering the restaurant at peak to sitting down and eating your food is about 8 minutes, and it's about 12 minutes to eat. So you're in and out in about 20 minutes max during a peak business hour. The applicant operates several Qdobas throughout Long Island, and he's very familiar with their operations and how busy they'll get. In his experience, only about 12 to 16 seats are going to be occupied at any given time, and they're generally groups of people, 2 or more, that are coming in to eat. We expect that about 30% of the total customers will dine in. The applicant has seen, even prior to the current stay-at-home restrictions were put in, he's seen a vast change in the way in which people are consuming food in restaurants or from restaurants. Approximately 70% of his business is takeout, either by coming in and picking up, delivery, or catering orders. So that leaves about 30% of the people will dine in. About 10.3% of his customers are actually showing up to the door to pick up food and take it someplace else. So, if you look at the numbers that they're seeing in their other restaurants, about 60% are either delivery orders or catering orders. So, with that, we don't think that the parking is going to be a major issue. Also in this area, we expect to see a lot of foot traffic from the hospital and the medical offices surrounding the restaurant. The maximum employees per shift is about 6. So assuming we have 16 seats occupied in the restaurant, and each person drove their own car out of that 16, plus the 6 employees, that would be the 22 spaces that we're providing on site.
Mr. Farrell, can I just ask you, if
Yes.
you're only going to have 16 people at any one given time in there and you're short on parking, why you're proposing 44 seats?
Well, the number of seats, there's 2 things. One, the number of seats, whether we have 16 seats in the restaurant or 50 seats in the restaurant, we're required to have 31 spaces because of the square footage of the building. But the real issue, I think, is when people come into restaurants, they don't want to sit on top of each other. So if you only have 16 seats, they can only be put in certain places. It doesn't allow for spacing out when you have turnover on the number of people that are coming into the restaurant. So I don't know if any of the board members have been to a restaurant like a Qdoba, where you walk in and there are people sitting, close to the counter. There's people sitting close to the door. You don't want to sit right next to those people. You want to kind of space yourself out and give yourself some room. The building is what it is. And like I said, 44 seats allows them to rotate their guests in and out without anybody sitting on top of each other or anybody having to wait for a table. If we put in the minimum number of seats, then you have the possibility of people having to wait, which would increase ticket times and wait times and put a higher demand on the parking.
Right, but I mean, I understand the requirements may be the same based on square footage. I guess my point was if you don't think you're ever gonna need 44 people sitting down, if you got to the point where there were 44 people seated, your parking numbers are gonna change regardless of the requirement.
True, but if 44 people are seated in the restaurant, not all 44 people are coming in separate cars. My guess is a family of 4 is coming in one car. You know, a couple is coming in one car. You know, based on what my client has seen in 2 very successful Qdoba restaurants, you know, the parking here will work for his needs. And if it didn't work, he would look for another location.
Duly noted, but I would just say you have obviously employees and the large takeout that you mentioned, but please go ahead with your application. We'll have more questions later.
No, I understand. No, we don't have a large takeout. You know, it's about 10% of our business is takeout. The rest is 60% is delivery and catering. So, you know,
Have
again,
those numbers changed with regard to COVID-19?
I'm sorry.
Have your business model changed with regards to the current COVID-19 situation?
Well, obviously it had to, the numbers that I'm giving you were prior to the stay-at-home restrictions. With COVID-19, obviously we can't have any dine-in. So it's all delivery, it's all DoorDash, it's all Grubhub and Uber Eats, and they've done very well on that model. You know, obviously it's that they prefer to have the doors open and people dining in and having a good time, but with the way their business works, they haven't suffered as much as others.
Thank you.
I don't know if the board has any questions. Like I said, I believe that this use is certainly in character with the surrounding community. I think it's going to be a nice complement to the medical offices that are up and down Montauk Highway in this area. Certainly the hospital is going to produce a lot of foot traffic. People aren't going to give up parking spaces at the hospital. They'll definitely walk over to our restaurant to enjoy a meal, and certainly something different than your traditional fast food or a sit down restaurant.
Thank you. If you're done with the public hearing, if you're done with your speaking, let's see if there's anybody who wants to speak on the application. If not, we'll go to a staff report and we'll come back to questions. Okay, so I do not see anybody that's signed up to speak for this application. If you've joined the meeting late and like to speak, please hit the raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen and we'll allow you to speak now. If you're on the phone and would like to speak for this public hearing, please hit the *9 on your phone at this point and we'll allow you to speak. I am not seeing any hands raised, so I am going to turn to Ms. Wozniak to give us a report on this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject property is located on the northeast corner of Montauk Highway and Fordham Place. The property was brought before the board in 2017 in connection with the site plan application to expand the building and convert the use to a fresh food market. At that time, the board granted landscaping and buffer relaxations. Tonight, the applicant is looking to convert the building to a Qdoba Mexican restaurant with 44 seats. This conversion will require a 29% parking relaxation, but all other aspects of the previously approved site plan will remain the same. The building is located in an area with sidewalks that could be expected to have foot traffic from the hospital. In addition, the restaurant operates where customers order food and seat themselves. They do not dine for long periods. Based on this, the parking relaxation does not seem like it would have any adverse impact. However, planning does recommend the architectural elevations be modified to remove signage and imagery on the rear-facing residences and to remove the metal slat design to provide a more aesthetically pleasing design and to fit in better with this character of this portion of Montauk Highway. If the board feels comfortable with the parking relaxation and the architectural comments are addressed tonight, planning recommends the board grant the application subject to the attached conditions. Planning also received a letter right before this hearing from a neighbor. And their concern was regarding trash pickup. So if the board feels it's necessary, we can also add a condition that requires the applicant to make sure that the trash is picked up on the property and within 200 feet surrounding it.
Thank you, Ms. Wozniak. I would support the condition about the trash pickup. And the other thing I think that same person raised, and it's not, I don't know if it's for the applicant or for the town, but since Fordham Place is the dead end, maybe putting signage there so when people make a right out of that parking lot, they don't all turn down the dead end thinking they can cut through to Union Boulevard. So maybe just some signage there. Are there questions from other board members?
Yes.
Mr. Ruggieri?
Yeah, I just have a clarification as far as the conditions. I don't have an issue with the parking relaxation. I think its proximity to the hospital and to numerous medical offices would generate a lot of foot traffic. But the condition on the parking relaxation states that employees shall be encouraged to park in remote areas. Being that there's residential neighborhoods to the north of this, I wouldn't want to see employees parking on those residential streets. So that one condition should be, stipulate that the employees park in remote areas on site, and parking of employees in residential neighborhoods should be strictly prohibited.
Mr. Chairman, I have some questions when Mr. Fiorgiori's done.
Okay.
I'm
Mr.
finished.
Ruggieri,
That was my comment, just about the employee parking. Wouldn't want to see them on residential streets.
I concur, Mr. Ruggieri, on that, and we're still comfortable with the employee. How many employees would be working at a typical shift?
The maximum number of employees during a shift would be 6. My client does not want his employees parking on the residential streets, and if it becomes an issue, he will make arrangements to get them to park someplace other than a residential street.
Okay, thank you for addressing that. Mr. Brown?
Yes, I'm a little leery of the parking relaxation, and I don't know that the other stores that your client owns is a good example of knowledge. One of them's in Kennedy Airport, I believe, and the other one's in Fresh Meadows. And I don't know what type of parking relaxation you have there.
Those are not the restaurants that I'm referring to. He actually has one on Hempstead Turnpike in East Meadow, which is has significantly more traffic than Montauk Highway. I know Montauk Highway is busy, but Hempstead Turnpike in East Meadow is a 4-lane highway, and it's right across the street from Nassau University Medical Center, and so it's a very similar, comparable use. And the other restaurant is in Hicksville. So they're Long Island based. They're not Queens restaurants.
Okay, the two I'm familiar with is one is Kennedy Airport, which I know you don't have any parking there. And the
Right.
other one is Fresh Meadows, which is obviously a different animal.
Yeah, I agreed completely, but those are not my clients' restaurants.
And Mr. Farrell, to Mr. Brown's point, I mean, you've looked at the planning board special permit conditions, number 3, that if in fact there are complaints about parking, you're okay with that condition?
Yes, we're fine. I went through the conditions with my client in detail. He's fine with the conditions from the planning department.
Yeah, because I mean, I agree with Mr. Brown's concern on that, but I'm okay with the application as is because we have the condition in there. If there is a problem, we can come back and address it. Reducing the number of seats or requiring you to, enter into an agreement with someone else for cross access or for other parking.
Absolutely.
Certainly that Burger King lot across the way is never full.
I know.
Working there all the time, so you do have options available to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there other questions from other board members?
Mr. Chairman, just two quick questions. One, hours of operation, and is alcohol served at this particular restaurant?
I believe they do serve alcohol, and they would keep their option open for it. It would really depend on the demand. If this is more of a lunch location and they're not selling it, they won't sell it, but they want to keep their options open, obviously. The hours are 10:30 a.m. to midnight at most. Again, that's going to be based on demand. If they find that the the later hours after 10 p.m. aren't working, they would roll back their hours, but their restaurants typically work 10:30 to 8 to midnight.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the board?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Bruno?
Yeah, I'm normally concerned about parking as well, but in this case, I'm looking at it. And Mr. Farrell, you're saying you make the 1 to 2 count on the seating, right? Because you have 22 to the 44.
Correct.
It's the 1 to 100 that's the one that makes the expense. But I'm looking at the floor plan that you guys provided. This is what you intend to build?
Yes.
Okay, because looking at that, do you know what percentage of this is the eating area? Because it looks to me like between kitchens, bathrooms, I mean, it's a very large kitchen. It appears that more than half the building is all the other areas and not the seating. So I think it's a little misleading using that 1 to 100 in this case, because so much of it is not possible for people to be sitting in. It's just really kitchen area.
Correct. I mean, that's one of the things about serving fresh food is you need to have a lot of refrigerator space. You need to have a lot of prep space. It's not like a McDonald's where things are running frozen and they just need a freezer and they just bring things out and heat them up in microwaves or those types of new wave ovens and those types of things. So they do need a lot of kitchen space and, space for their employees to work. So yeah, I would agree with you that that it is a little misleading. It's less than half of the floor. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but less than half of the floor area is used for dining purposes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Carol, one of the other questions, or one of the points that was raised by Ms. Wozniak that I'm not sure if you responded to or if you've had discussions with her is removing the signage and imagery that faces the residences in the rear.
Not a problem. We'll take care of it.
And then the metal slat design, something more aesthetically pleasing, I think the planning staff had asked for. Is that okay as well?
I mean, if you ask my client, the answer would be no. That is the architectural design that Qdoba Corporate has come up with. It's not as, on paper, it doesn't look as good as it does out in the field. But if it's the difference between getting an approval and getting a denial, we'll have to work with it, I guess is the best way to answer that question.
All right. Well, I don't know. I mean, I defer to the planning staff on that. I mean, hopefully we can resolve this so you can keep the character of the business and still move forward in a way that's pleasing to downtown Bayshore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Farrell.
No, I understand completely. I think at the end of the day, we'll have to explore another option instead of the metal slat design.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything further to the application?
No, I think that covers it. And if the board has any other questions, but I would just respectfully request that the board approve this application as submitted, obviously subject to the conditions requested by planning staff.
Yeah, I just the feel I get from people on the planning board, haven't spoken about the application, but I think it's a good application. I think tonight we're going to have to leave the public record open for 30 days in light of the technical difficulties at the beginning.
Sure.
So I don't know that it'll be an approval immediately.
I understand.
Okay. That being said, if there's nothing further from anyone, I'll turn to Mr. Frugieri to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we we can't close the public hearing. We're going to keep it open for 30 days for written comments and reserve decision.
Thank you. It's a motion by Mr. Frugieri to leave the public hearing open for 30 days for public comment and reserve decision. Is there a second to that?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Brown. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? It passes. Thank you. We're going to go to the next item on the agenda, which is town board application public hearing, Saxon Sunrise Realty LLC, CZ 2020-014, south side of Sunrise Highway Service Road, State Route 27, approximately 135 feet east of Saxon Avenue, Bay Shore, 2036 Sunrise Highway. Applicant requests a change of zone from Business 1 to Business 3, a planning board special permit for a vehicle repair use pursuant to 68-302.1C, and a modification of covenants and restrictions associated with TC 4546 in order to leave an existing vehicle repair use. A minor subdivision is also requested as part of this application. Good evening, is the applicant here? We have the applicant on this. Nicole, are you the attorney for the applicant?
Yes. Oh, can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go right ahead.
All right. Mr. Chairman, before I proceed with this application, you had indicated at the beginning of this meeting that number 7 was being adjourned. My number 7 is Trek Bay Shore LLC, and it's for a recommendation. I assume that is still on because you seem to have indicated a different name of case, but can you confirm that Trek Bay Shore is still on?
Yeah, I have Trek as number 8 on mine. It would be the new number, actually be the number 6 now based upon the fact that 2 have been adjourned. But yes, Trek is still on.
Still on. Thank you, Mr.
You
Chairman.
have to stay late tonight.
All right. I'd love to be with the board late at night. Mr. Chairman, with reference to the application of Saxon Sunrise Realty LLC, appearing on behalf of the applicant Eugene Albina-Cola, 200 Railroad Avenue, Sayville, New York. First, I would like to let the record reflect that the affidavit of notification and posting has been delivered to the planning staff along with the signed return receipts. The applicant is requesting a minor subdivision approval, a change of zone of a portion of an existing shopping center from Business 1 District to Business 3 District, a planning board special permit for a vehicle repair use pursuant to 68-302.1C, and a modification of previously imposed covenants and restrictions pursuant to, I believe, case number TC 4656. The application involves the existing Coles Plaza Shopping Center located at the southeast corner of Saxon Avenue and the South Service Road of Sunrise Highway, Bay Shore. The shopping center contains a total area of 19.16 acres and is zoned Business 1 District. The shopping center has approximately 177,608 square feet of commercial space located thereon with attendant parking, and there are 1,045 parking spaces. The shopping center has an existing Firestone tire sales and auto repair center on the site, which building was issued a certificate of occupancy on April 4, 1973, and has continued its operation at this location since that date and to date. The shopping center site was originally zoned Business 3 when the Firestone Auto Repair Center was issued its certificate of occupancy. However, in August of 2000, the shopping center was rezoned to Business 1 District, which then caused the Firestone Auto Repair Center to be a non-permitted use in the Business 1 District. In July of 2003, a pad site for a Chili's restaurant was approved on the shopping center site, and pursuant to a declaration of covenants and restrictions, there would be no further extension of the Firestone Auto Repair lease, and that the vehicle repair use would be terminated. That was contained in TC 4656. The applicant is seeking to retain the Firestone Auto Center and legalize the use. The applicant is proposing a minor subdivision to carve out 0.85 acres from the 19.16 acres, or some 36,885 square feet, and rezone that 0.85 acres from Business 1 to Business 3 to permit the Firestone Tire and Auto Repair operation to continue, and permit and request a planning board special permit for the continued operation of the use. A modification of the previously imposed covenants and restrictions is required to eliminate the requirement to terminate the auto repair use. So we're taking a section of the 19.16 acres, rezoning it to business 3 from business 1. That particular 0.85 acres does meet all of the dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance. The balance of the shopping center will remain business 1 district, and it will contain 18.31 acres, and again, meet all of the dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance for the business 1 district. There will be no change in the layout or function of the Firestone Auto Repair Center or the balance of the shopping center. The 2 proposed parcels will operate in the same integrated manner, which they have since the inception of the development of the shopping center. There will be no disturbance of any area of the shopping center as a result of this application and for any relief requested. The proposed site for the Firestone Tire and Vehicle Repair Shop will contain 54 parking spaces, although only 35 is required. The remainder of the shopping center will contain 991 parking spaces, although 1,063 spaces are required. Although the business 1 portion of the shopping center will have a 72 parking space shortfall, or an approximate 7% relaxation, the shopping center will have more than adequate parking. The overall site plan has never had a parking issue. The overall site has never had a parking issue since its inception and will remain exactly as it is. Now, Mr. Colgan has forwarded covenants and restrictions to this office this afternoon, which I believe we will be able to resolve. There are a couple of issues I'd like to discuss with Mr. Colgan. And one of his requirements is a cross-access and parking agreement, so that in fact, the parking spaces of the Firestone Tire and Repair Center will be able to be used by the shopping center and vice versa. So what we have is a situation that is simply legalizing the vehicle repair operation, continuing the shopping center in the exact same operation as it has since, again, the shopping center was developed and the Firestone Tire and Repair Center was erected thereon. If the board has any questions with reference to parking, I do have Mr. Dan Winkleman available to submit testimony. Does the board have any questions, Mr. Chairman, at this time?
None at this time. Let me go to the public hearing, go to Mr. Colgan's report, and then we'll come back with any questions we might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I do not see anybody who has already said they wanted to speak on this hearing. If you joined the meeting late or you're on the phone and you'd like to speak regards to this hearing, if you're on the phone, please hit *9 on your phone now. If you're joined the meeting late, you can hit the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen. If you do that, we'll allow you to speak now. Not seeing anybody doing that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Colgan to give a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This application proposes to allow a vehicle repair place to remain as a pad site within an existing shopping center. In 2003, the town board imposed a covenant that the applicant was required to let the lease lapse on the tire center and said pad site to be reverted to a business 1 use. A vehicle repair place can be a complementary use for a shopping center. Patrons can leave their vehicle for an extended period of time and shop or dine in other tenancies while waiting for the repairs to be finished. Given that the tire center abuts Sunrise Highway and has been operating with no known complaints, the staff has no objection to the applicant's request. Covenants limiting the use to a generic vehicle repair place prohibiting body work should mitigate any visual concerns that are sometimes associated with vehicle repair establishments. The staff will ultimately recommend that the board grant the modification, provided we hear no outstanding issues come up within the 30-day comment period.
Thank you. Any questions from the board members? Mr. Brown?
Yes, I would concur with Mr.
Can't hear you, Kevin.
DiNicola in reference to the parking.
Kevin, we can't hear you.
I can hear.
Ed, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Mine's not working. Go right ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead, you're working.
Okay, I would concur with Mr. DiNicola in reference to the parking at that site. I mean, I've been going to that site probably in the 1970s. It was there, I believe, and there's never been a parking issue there, and there's more parking that I think they would ever use. So I don't think it would be a deal breaker for me with it not having a cross access agreement.
Thank you. You still live? Any further questions from the board? Not seeing any. Anything further from you, Ms. DiNicola? You're muted, Ms. Jean, you're muted. Hold on. Go ahead. No, let me unmute you. I can't unmute him.
You're muted, Gene.
Ms. DiNicola, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you now.
Thank you. I respectfully request that the planning board recommend approval of the change of zone from business 1 to business 3, that the planning board grant the special permit for the vehicle repair use, that it approve the minor subdivision proposed, that it recommend that the town board modify the previously imposed covenants and restrictions so that the vehicle repair use may continue and remain, and that if necessary, a site plan modification for parking. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I thank the board for its time.
Thank you. And Ms. DiNicola, I think the consensus seems to be based on the questions that were in support, but we're going to leave the record open just to make sure that nobody was left out this evening who might have tried to get in that couldn't get in.
No, I understand. That's fine, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That being said, is there a motion?
I'd make a motion to Matamore. I don't know if you can see me, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Matamore has got the motion. Kevin, you were muted there. I saw you, but you. Go ahead, Mr. Matamore.
Well, the motion, as we've been doing, is to keep the hearing open for the 30 days. I wanted to add, because I live maybe a few hundred yards from this location, and I agree with Mr. Brown's comments as well as Mr. DiNicola's comments, that parking is not an issue. I feel very comfortable with that. There are acres of parking that are never used there. And it's been that way for as long as I can remember. So I do make the motion to keep the hearing open for the 30 days with a view that that would be granted unless there's an objection is made during the 30 days that is something we have to address, and that should take care of it.
It's motion by Mr. Matamore to keep the public hearing open for 30 days and approve the application unless something is raised during the 30 days that needs to be addressed.
Correct.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Or no? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? We're approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the board.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, Town Board application, public hearing, Eastview Apartment Development LLC, CZ 2020-009, east side of Eastview Drive, approximately 958 feet south of Courthouse Drive, Central Islip, number 0, Eastview Drive. Applicant requests a change of zone from PDD-MUN to PDD-MF in order to construct 25 apartments. Good evening to the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Raymond Justo, 715 South Country Road, West Bay Shore, New York. I represent the applicant. The property is a 2.2 acre parcel. It's on the east side of Eastview Drive in Central Islip. It's adjacent to Toro College, and it's across the street from Courthouse Commons. It's also literally hundreds of feet from the state and federal courthouses. I would direct your attention to slides. If we can get slides A and B. I don't know if we have that or not.
We might be able to-
Just give me 1 minute.
He's getting it.
Sure. All right, so that slide A, that's a view across the street of Courthouse Commons, and slide B obviously is the federal courthouse, which overlooks the property. The present zone of the property is PDD municipal, and basically this type of zone allows for storage of equipment, storage of materials like sandstone. It allows for storage of motor vehicles. Most importantly, it would permit a municipal DPW yard to exist on the property directly across the street from Courthouse Commons. And also, in fact, it would also allow for equipment and trucks to enter and to exit the property. In fact, just about a quarter of a mile from the property, if you go to slide C and D, you're going to see a DPW yard that's owned by the town of Islip. And that would be the type of use that would be permitted under the current zoning for that property directly across the street from Courthouse Commons. In our opinion, respectfully, that type of use of the property is not the highest and best use of the property, especially it's no longer appropriate for this area. The nature of that type of use we believe would diminish the property values in the area. And most importantly, just as importantly, it would create noise and traffic issues that I'm sure that the neighborhood would not enjoy. You would have constant trucks and equipment going in and out of the property onto Eastview Drive directly in front of Courthouse Commons. Our proposal would be, we believe, the best transitional use for the property. And especially since it's located, again, adjacent to Toro College and directly across the street from Courthouse Commons. And that would be to change the current zoning, again, from PDD municipal to PDD multifamily. That would permit, PDD multifamily would permit 25 apartments to be built. We would propose to build 25 luxury apartments. If we can go to slide E, we can see a color rendering of the site plan. Actually, we could, if Sean can get back to that color rendering, I think it would show the board a little bit more effectively. Yeah, right there. So what you can see from that plan is we're going to try to keep as much of the vegetation as possible in its current state. Each unit would be 2 bedrooms with 2 baths. There's going to be a small fitness center in the building at the bottom of that picture that would be used only for the tenants of the property. And you can also note that there's a nice water feature that we're going to put in, and that would be complementary to the existing water feature that's in Courthouse Commons directly across the street. And we believe this type of use of the property and the change of zone to this would have many benefits. One would be that 25 luxury units would create much less noise and traffic than a noisy and busy DPW yard. It's the look of it is designed to complement Courthouse Commons. And since it's so close, it's within walking distance of the federal, the state, and the district courts. It could be a great opportunity for people working there to be in an apartment complex that's within walking distance from their job. As far as the design is concerned, if we can go to slides F and G, our client was very successful in developing Macy Estates in Islip, and the look would be very similar to Macy Estate. If you go to slide, basically go to slide G, if you could. The next one, yeah. That's the type of look that we're looking to go for here. Right now, the proposed building design is something along those lines. Something very similar to that. Actually, if we can go to slide H, there's a rendering of what the building, right now, what we think it would look like. As a matter of fact, right behind me is, I think you can see that, is a better view of that. Yeah. So if it is approved, our client is willing to work, very obviously, as it has in the past, very closely with the planning department and with the neighbors to create an appropriate design. You should note that instead of, using vinyl, we're not going to use vinyl as the town has recommended. We're going to use hardy board planking. It's much more expensive, but I think it'll add to the character of the building in the area. And also, as the town has requested, my client is willing to use brick in its design, and that kind of matches the PDD district and the brick, all the brick that you see in the PDD district. With respect to neighbors, my client has reached out to neighbors and has had a dialogue with neighbors, and he's made them aware that he wants to make this a collaborative process. And certainly, we're going to create something here it's not going to be a detriment. It's actually going to enhance the community and the area. And lastly, and just as importantly, we'd like to note that under the PDD rules, our client will be making a $50,000, if approved, will be making a $50,000 grant to the town of Islip for improvements to the hamlet of Central Islip, which we think is only a benefit. So we believe this is to be a change of zone to be the highest, the best use of the property, at the current time and in the locale that it's in. And that's basically our presentation.
Thank you. I do not see anybody listed on here for public comment. If you joined the meeting late and you'd like to speak on this, please hit the raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. Will allow you to speak. Or if you're on the phone and like to speak on this application, please hit *9 on your phone now, and we'll allow you to speak. Not seeing anybody raising their hands, I'm going to turn to Mr. Colgan to give us a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application proposes a 25-unit non-age restricted apartment complex. The property was zoned to PDD municipal in accordance with the previous CI master plan. The uses in those districts are limited to typical government uses like Mr. Juice had mentioned earlier. The 2005 Central Islip plan indicated that much of the municipal land use was designated as such in 1989 to await further developments. No specific use was envisioned for the subject property. This project could further some of the goals of the master plan update, including addressing the increased demand for diversified housing, revitalizing the hamlet of Central Islip, and supporting the town's area-wide economic development efforts. Traffic Safety reviewed the initial concept plan and recommended right-in, right-out access to address safety and visual concerns. The staff will refer the plan back to that division in addition to any relevant comments for that division we may hear tonight. So in light of that, the staff would recommend that the board reserve decision to review any comments or concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Colgan. Any questions for the board members, from the board members?
I have a comment, Mr.
Matamore.
Thank you. Mr. Justo, I think it's a strong application. I know the property very well. I go by it almost every day. And I don't think the use is at all controversial with regard to what you want to do. What does concern me, and we've had discussions in the past with regard to Toro, is East View is a very heavily traveled roadway. I think it may be more heavily traveled than the planners ever way back when thought it would be, because it's a natural cutting through from Southern State Parkway to the north part of the town up at Islip Terrace. Now, but that's a problem that has to be solved. And certainly this property is conducive to the use that your client, Mr. Annaboli, wants to build. He has a great reputation for quality. And so I certainly think the town should do everything we can do to facilitate that. But I mentioned to you that the ingress and egress is probably going to be the biggest challenge, to figure out how to do that safely. and not acerbate any further the traffic on Eastview Drive that is going there constantly. It's there, and I'm sure we're going to use it. So it needs some creative thinking, however, between your client and the town to ameliorate any concerns for traffic safety and volume. So with that, those are my comments, and I think it's a very strong application.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore. Further questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman?
Okay,
Mr. Brown and then Mr. Moriarty.
thank you.
Yes, I think the design of it with the apartments going up against the parking lots on both sides is an excellent use of that. And I don't see it being intrusive to any of the neighbors. I do believe it's a good application also.
Mr. Moriarty?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions for the applicant. What's the unit mix that we're looking at here? And is this an ownership or rental project?
They're all the same, 2-bedroom, 2-bath,
Okay. And these are all rentals?
all rentals.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I would agree with the record of the statements by the other board members that it's a very strong project. I think it's a very good use of that site. The one issue I think Mr. Matamore underscored again is the flow of traffic on that in that area that we have to. But that's a larger issue that we have to look at as a board going forward. But you know,
Well, just as a footnote, my client has already told me that it may actually be somewhat safer if we have concerns with regard to safety to have the entrance a little bit closer to a little further off that curve.
Mhm.
So
Sure.
a little further north than the current entrance, because the current entrance was where he was told to have it, but it is on a curve, and there's a chance that it may be somewhat safer to have it a little further north.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a comment.
Mr. Frugieri?
Yeah, regardless of where the entrance to the property is, I believe traffic safety is recommended right in and right out. But also the use as proposed is far less intense than any potential use that can go there under the existing zoning. So I think from a traffic standpoint, this project would be a benefit.
Thank you. And we're going to refer it back to traffic safety, just do a final review with the applicant on that.
Okay, no problem.
Any further questions from the board? Mr. Jusso, the affordability requirement, you're meeting that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay. If there's nothing further, is anything further from the applicant?
No, thank you.
That being said, is there a motion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to reserve decision.
Okay, and we'll leave the public hearing open also, Mr. Brown, as part of that motion?
Yes, we're going to leave the public hearing open for the 30 days.
Thank you. It's a motion by Mr. Brown to leave the public hearing open for 30 days and to reserve decision. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Mr. Moriarty. All
Second.
in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? We're reserved. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Have a good night.
Next item on the agenda, site plan modification public hearing, J. Nazaro Partnership LP, PB 2020-009, south side of Main Street, State Route 27A, west side of Degnan Boulevard, Bayshore. Applicant requests a buffer and parking relaxation in association with the development of a medical office. Good evening to the applicant. Do we have the applicant? Is this Mr. Bertolini?
Yes, this is Steve Bertolino. Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you now. Go ahead.
Give me 1 second. Turn off volume so you- My apologies. There's a couple of us here with different devices. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Steve Bertolino on behalf of J. Nazaro Partnership. I'm sure this board is well aware of this particular parcel on the southwest corner of Degnan Boulevard, Montauk Highway. This was a dilapidated gas station that was, there for a very long time. And since that structure was torn down a couple of years ago, it's just been an overgrown parcel. Directly behind this parcel is another parking lot, was a storage. It's still currently being used for storage, mostly of boats, some vehicles. And then directly behind that, the third part of this assemblage is part of the old mini golf or the putt-putt golf, which is technically zone B3 because it was part of the parcel that is now Taco Bell that runs up to Montauk Highway. So Mr. Nazaro purchased these parcels to create the assemblage. We think that this is, oh, my apologies. We think that this is a good use. We're proposing to enhance the area with a 25,000 square foot medical building. We're going to maintain most of the setbacks. We don't need any variances other than the buffer, to our knowledge. Surrounding area consists of multiple uses, such as retail locations in a strip shopping center. We have several fast food or quick service restaurants, as they like to be called, including the Taco Bell and the McDonald's directly across the street. We also have, going down Denyon Boulevard, some commercial enterprises of various natures. And directly across the street on Denyon, you have J&R Steakhouse. Across the canal from that, going to the east, you have the lumberyard and then the mobile home park. Going to the west, you have the CVS on the corner of Saxon and Montauk. And then if you go to the southwest corner, you have the old shopping center that is now the Walbaums. I'm sorry, that is now the Northwell Health with the TD Bank on the corner. On the north side of Montauk and Saxon, you have the larger commercial shopping center. So we're generally surrounded by businesses, all around. Other than the southern part of this parcel, we have a senior citizen complex whose parking lot abuts our parcel. And directly to the west, we do have a apartment complex that also abuts our parcel, but that's not their parking lot. That's generally like a green area, if you will. The medical building to the west of us, directly to the west, is a little bit smaller. It's a standalone site. We will be maintaining our 10-foot setback from them as well. And the only other parcel that we really come across is over by our parking lot. So what we're seeking tonight is a relaxation of the buffer. What we've done is we've kept the building as far to the north as possible. The building will have a nice appearance on this intersection, which I should point out is a T intersection. We don't anticipate any traffic, but we'll circle back to that. On the buffer to the south, the parking lot for the senior citizen complex adjoins our lot, and that is where we're looking for the relaxation of the buffer, as well as on the west side. So technically, you have a parking lot, a buffer on our parcel, a buffer on the senior citizen parcel, which is definitely not the 25 feet, because they weren't adjoining a residential to commercial. They were allowed to go a little closer. But combined, you do have about 25 feet of a buffer between the southerly line of our parcel and the northerly line of that senior citizen complex. To the west, it gets a little smaller. We have about 6 feet. We have a lot of vegetation that we're planting, but again, we're joining over to the apartment complex there, and that's generally their green area in their corner. So we don't anticipate there being much interaction, if you will, or encroachment of noise or anything else, because the building is the furthest away from these two residential uses. Again, the residences are apartment complexes or senior complexes. Going a little further south of the senior complex, you enter into the truly residential single-family dwelling zone. We're at least 400 feet, if not 500 feet from our building to those residences. Our parking lot is a good 200 to 300 feet away from them. We don't anticipate any adverse impact on those residences at all. So the proposal is to construct 25,200 square foot, 2-story medical building. The footprint is 12,600 feet. The size of this building requires approximately 170 spaces. I'd like to point out that as we were waiting for our turn tonight, we were doing some calculations, and we actually believe that we may only need 168 spaces. That being said, we're providing 161 spaces on this lot, which represents just about a 5% relaxation. And I want to point out that, sometimes we make applications before this board and we're pushing that 10% administrative or planning relaxation that's often granted. We're not even close to that in this case. So we do feel that the relaxation of the parking is somewhat de minimis, given the size of the parking lot and the number of spaces. We don't think that's an issue, but of course, we're here for comments if someone else does. The building is, like I said, 200 feet from the southerly lot line, and then you also have the senior citizen complex just below that. And I don't think we're going to have any issue with that neighbor, as our parking lot adjoins there, as I said before. On the landscaping, so we need 20% on the landscaping. We're providing 13.3%. The minimum street frontage, as you know, is 8 feet. We're providing just about 1.5 times that at 11.8 feet. So although we're asking for a slight decrease in the landscaping, most of the landscaping that the town likes to see in the front and on the roadway, that's exactly, we're providing it in excess. On the parking lot side, although we will have less landscaping than's technically required, we don't believe it should be intrusive on anyone. We don't think it's going to hurt anyone. If we would look at the west side of the parking lot, but the south of the Taco Bell, you can see even there, we're adjoining that Taco Bell parking lot. So we don't maintain landscaping there. But we come around to the actual west side. Once again, you have the green space for the apartment complex. And then on the south side, you have more landscaping where the buffer is being asked to be relaxed. Yeah, I'm sorry, just, so again, we are providing landscaping all around, although the amount of landscaping we're requiring is slightly reduced from the 20% that's required. The site's going to have, as I said, the perimeter landscaping. We're also going to be proposing a black chain link slatted fence. We feel that the stockade fence generally doesn't last as long. It's certainly a little less expensive to put up the stockade fence, but Mr. Nazaro has done other projects where the black chain link fence with the slats has been allowed. It does appear much nicer. It holds up much longer over time. And we believe that as well will create a buffer even before, or a visual buffer, even before you get to the vegetation. We have a photo, if Sean, if you could put up the elevation of the building that was provided to you. Thank you. So as you can see from this one rendering that we're showing, the building is not a square brick building that Mr. Nazaro has built up over in Bayshore that I'm sure you're familiar with on the corner of Brentwood Road and Union Boulevard. We did have some conversations with some people, residents that lived in the area. And one of the specific comments was, let's do something different than that brick style. Mr. Nazaro is with me tonight. If you have any questions on the design of the building, he can tell you more about the rendering that you see before you. Jim, do you want to speak? Sean, can you put Jim Nazaro on?
I'm on. Should I start speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in reference to the, let me make sure I'm sorry. In reference to the architecture, I think we've tried to create I've tried to create a very residential look if we could, with smoke roofs, residential shingles, and some stone knee wall at the bottom of the building and so forth. We believe that's going to definitely tie in with the surrounding neighborhood, much greater than a true, commercial looking building similar to Brentwood Road, as Mr. Bertolino said. As far as the landscaping goes, I think Mr. Bertolino might have misspoke on a couple of items. On south property line, basically we have a 16-foot, 15.9 is the smallest buffer area that we have instead of 25, though it does increase heading to the west to the full 25. So we're averaging about 20 feet along that buffer. Went out to the site and there's a double row of arborvitae. If you go back to the site plan, Sean, I believe it's noted that part of that south property line has a double row of arborvitae, which both rows cannot remain due to the new parking area that's going in. They're about 30 foot in height. So it would be my preference, if possible, to try to transplant those second row, those trees to the westerly, to continue the westerly buffer planting, and then we would have some very mature trees. If that can't be done, of course, we would plant new Leland cypress, which are very hardy and fast growing trees, and we'll have a decent buffer in no time at all. Continuing clockwise around the site, all that planting of arborvitae is not required, if I'm correct, because that's all abutting commercial zoning, though we do want to do that just so that we, add some landscaping into the site as much as we can, since percentage wise we're a little low. At least we figure we'll add some nice shrubbery and enhance the property, as well as the chain link fence, which I also believe is not required along another commercial property, but I still would like to keep my parcel segregated in its own way of other papers blowing onto it, and we could keep it nice and neat. The trees that I'm proposing along the roadway where the building is would maybe be a clump birch type tree, only because there's a 10-foot setback, and any of the street trees that are typically on the town's requirement list would, in a very short period of time, grow into the building and couldn't be maintained and trimmed properly, whereas I believe we can with this. It would create a somewhat translucent effect, more residential, and soften the building, soften the elevation of the building. That's pretty much it, unless you have some other questions you'd like to ask or comments.
Sean, if you can pull me back up.
You're up.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we also had a traffic study prepared from Stonefield Engineering, and I believe, Sean, you have Andrew Valari with us tonight as well. If the board has any questions on traffic, feel free to ask, of course. But our study indicates that we will have some trip generation here, approximately 60 to 70 new trips generated. And, from what Mr. Valari can explain to you if necessary, this is not going to propose an impact. There still should be the ability to come in. Andrew, if you want to touch base on this, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. Can everyone hear me tonight?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Good evening. For the record, my name is Andrew Valeri. I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of New York, and I am the civil engineer and traffic engineer on behalf of the applicant. So very briefly about this project from a traffic perspective, what's being proposed is a medical office, and coronavirus times set aside, this is a very essential use for everybody in the neighborhood, and it's a very good use that could go on this property. We're in front of this board for a number of reasons. We'll be eventually in front of the zoning board for a depth extension application where we're requesting the B3 zoning, which is on the southerly portion of the property, be extended. The property is also zoned B1 and residential. What we're looking to do is extend that B3 zone to permit this use, but what you could also develop in B3 without an application like we're making tonight is you could propose other uses on this property. We're all very familiar with the area. We're only a couple blocks west of where we would be if we were all in person tonight. There's a number of fast food chains in the corridor. B3 does allow a fast food restaurant on the property with a special permit from the town board. Having said that, there's other uses that are permitted as of right in the B3 zone that could feasibly be developed on this site that would generate a similar number of, or a similar high number of traffic, whereas opposed to what you have in front of you tonight, a very essential use to the neighborhood, something that's not as intensive of a traffic generating use in medical office. So, everyone's very familiar with unsignalized intersections along Montauk Highway. You may be familiar with, if you're looking to make a left turn out across traffic, it could take you some time. So what's baked into our analysis that Mr. Bertolino mentioned is looking specifically at traffic flowing east and west along Montauk Highway. How does traffic flow? Are there gaps in traffic where you can make a left turn out? And if you look at how much traffic would be generated by a medical office of this size, you'd see that there are sufficient gaps in traffic, and the level of service of the intersection of Montauk Highway and Degnon would operate well in the future as a result of this project. So just quickly in conclusion, the relaxations that Mr. Bertolino and Mr. Nazaro have mentioned are very minor in relation to the overall scope of the application. We almost meet the parking requirement, and as far as the industry standard manual ITE about parking goes, there's plenty of parking on this property for a medical office of this size, and the minor buffer requirements that we're not meeting are a symptom of trying to provide the most amount of parking on the property to meet the code requirement. So in conclusion, the traffic impact of a project like this, of a medical office, specifically with respect to anything else that you could develop on this property, the future operating conditions would be acceptable in the neighborhood. So I'd be happy to answer any questions of the board or of the public.
Thank you. I agree with that. I mean, I like the project for the area. I like how you've changed the building from those that you have on Union Boulevard. My one question is, and it's hard to tell from the site plan that I'm looking, or the rendering I'm looking at, but does that exit way to the south line up with that residential house across the street? And if it does, is there a way to do something to move it a little further north so that in the wintertime, when you're in the evening at 5 o'clock, it's dark out, headlights are not shining in their front window? That's my only question.
So you're talking about the southerly access to the site on Denyon?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not sure if it lines up exactly to that residence. Give you one moment, because I do have a different shot. It's something we certainly take into consideration to look at to see if we could reconfigure that. I understand your concern. You don't want the headlights shining directly across to the east onto that residential property. Certainly we'll look into that. We can try to redesign it so that we can move that access a little to the north if possible. Of course, that may impact some of the spaces, but obviously we're going to make every effort to make that happen.
Thank you.
May I make a point? I don't know if I'm unmuted or not.
You're using Mr. Bertolino's mic, but now you're okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. In respect to that, as far as headlights go, being a medical building, most of the traffic is going to be, in morning and early evening hours. There will not be late hours, or typically not late hours in medical buildings. So I don't think the headlight situation is really going to be much of an issue. It seems like there is a large tree and some greenery in front of that residence. So even if there were a few cars, I don't suspect that would be, much of a problem. I don't think that relocating that entrance is really a great idea, because the circulation works rather well right now. I would like to keep that if possible. I believe it's going to make the parking lot flow the smoothest. But again, if the town has some other ideas on that, please let me know.
Thank you. And maybe leaving it there, but making it an exit only so it's not as wide or something along those lines. I would assume most people would come in off of Montauk Highway, but just to take a look at it with traffic safety and see if there's a way that, if it does in fact line up in front of the house, if it doesn't, I don't think it's probably, not an issue we need to look at all.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Mr. Chairman, we understand your concern. Obviously, we're going to look at that and see what can be done. Work with the planning department to see, as you heard Mr. Nazaro say, we did work hard as far as designing the parking lot to maximize the space. And, if it had to be moved up a little bit, certainly, it's something we're going to look into.
Right, and it may not line up with it anyway. Maybe it's hard to tell from here, so it may not be an issue at all. Just
And I apologize. I didn't anticipate that. Obviously, preparing for the hearing, we look at every aspect and try to anticipate what's out there. That was one that got by me. So I don't have a direct answer for you at this time.
You should know by now, I always have a question that you can't anticipate.
It was a good question.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything further, Mr. Bertolino?
No, obviously, if the board has any questions, we're here to address them, and we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. I don't see anyone signed up to speak on this. If you joined the meeting late and would like to speak on this, if you're on the video app, please hit the raise your hand function at the bottom, or if you're on the phone, please hit *9 on your phone and we'll allow you to speak now. Not seeing anybody doing that, so I'm going to turn to Mr. Colgan to give us a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This application proposes developing a vacant lot into a medical office. The proposed buffer ranges from about 10 feet to 16.9 feet instead of the required 25 feet. The applicant would be able to accommodate 2 rows of planting in the larger areas, or as stated by the applicant, large evergreens such as Leland cypress could be planted that could fill in the buffer in a few years. The senior complex to the south has a significant mature buffer. The parking relaxation requested is approximately 9 spots. This is relatively small, and similar ratios have appeared to be adequate for the applicant's other medical offices within the town. Another consideration for the board is that much of this property is zoned Business 3, which is one of the most intense zoning districts of the town. The medical office is a less intense use allowed in this district and could be a mitigating circumstance to consider when weighed with the other noxious uses that could potentially be located here. In addition, the landscaping relaxation being sought is significantly outweighed by the very good architecture that the applicant is proposing. So in light of that, we did have a technical issue, so the staff would recommend that the board reserve decision to leave the record open for 30 days, and I'll bring it back at the next available hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Colgan. Are there questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions.
Mr. Brown or Mr. Bruno was that?
That was Mr. Brown.
Go ahead.
My question is, Jay, on the south side of the property, you have the buffer zone, and the senior apartments have a very heavy buffer on the one side. But where their senior apartments are closest to the proposed property, that's where the golf course is, they have very little buffer whatsoever. Is there any way to beef up your buffer in that area?
Sorry, Mr. Brown, could on the south property line along the senior complex, are you talking about the eastern portion where their parking area is, or the western?
Over here.
Well, on the eastern portion, there's a nice buffer there now, existing, correct?
Yes,
It's
very
the
nice.
other side where the golf course, putt-putt
Right.
golf course is, the apartments are closer to the property line, and there's really no buffer there.
Right, and that's why I would like, if at all possible, to be able to transplant these Leland cypress, because they're already definitely in excess of 30 feet in height. The buffer does get much wider. It gets 20 feet, well, not much wider, a little bit wider at that point. It's about 20 feet. I would be more than happy if I cannot transplant the Leland cypress to plant a larger size initially, so at least they start off, a little bit ahead of the game, and they'll catch up fairly quickly. Is that what you have in mind, or possibly a double row at that point?
Yeah, something. That's the closest access to residential, which are seniors. And
Right.
I'd like to give them the best buffer.
Yes, and so would I. That's why, I was looking at the trees, and it'd be a shame to waste, all the years of growth. And there are, machines that could come in and actually, dig them up in a nice ball and move them. And I think we're gonna have a real good shot at that. But if not, we'll plant the double row. I mean, the thing that you try not to do is overplant, whereas in a few years, now they're all growing into each other and they're looking sloppy. But I'm sure we can work out something to start off with a larger size tree, a larger size bush, evergreen, and create some sort of decent buffer from day one.
Mr. Brown, if I could elaborate a little bit. Just to be clear, the buffer on that particular southwesterly part, is the widest that we offer on this rendering at 20.4 feet. I also want to point out that it is the furthest from the building. And I'm sure everybody on this conference right now knows, most people, when they go to a building for a store or a doctor's office, they get as close as possible. My wife goes around in circles 3 or 4 times to get a closer spot. So the probability of these particular spots being filled up or used more frequently than the others is very slim. And that's just common sense on how everybody goes to a facility. I know it's not a basis upon which you can grant the relaxation, but if we think about how the property will actually be used on a day-to-day basis, similar to what Mr. Nazaro said about the nighttime, the medical use is not as heavy as it is during the day, so the headlight issue may be, muted. The same thing here. If you're approximately 200 feet from the building and there's a spot within 20 or 30 feet from the building, most people are going to opt for that closer spot. We do hear your concern. We did take that into consideration because we know that one structure is there in the senior complex. We'll make every effort to increase that buffer, in the tree sense, to mute any noise that may be in that area.
Also, a notation is that typically the tenants will instruct their employees to park furthest from the building to accommodate the patients. So they'll be there for 8 hours or so without moving.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Brown?
No, I'm good.
Thank you. Any further questions from other board members?
I have just one quick comment, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Matamore.
Yes, I just wanted to comment because I think it needs the comment that we've been all looking at that gas station site. It must be 25 years if it's a minute. It's been a long, long time of looking at that site, which was simply too small to accommodate the several different applications that were tried and queuing for fast food and traffic on Montauk Highway, and it never went anyplace. And Mr. Nazaro has the expertise and knowledge to be able to put together an assemblage with these 2 parcels to the south, which are no great architectural winners or design with boats and stuff. That's is really doing something that's excellent for the community and that area. And I compliment him for doing it and finally making some lemonade out of some lemons that have been lemons for a long, long time. So that, and the architecture, I think, is brilliant, because if you drive down Degnan Boulevard, it really does start to tie in the residential nature and character of that neighborhood, both on the commercial side with the gray barns and buildings, and it makes it fit in. I agree that the stone buildings that Mr. Nazaro's done on Brentwood Road is a different animal, and it's a different location. So I think he's hitting a home run, and he deserves our support. And I certainly would recommend that that we try and do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matamore.
Mr. Matamore, just not to belabor the point, but sometimes that's a double-edged sword, for Mr. Nazaro and any developer. The economies of scale that make this building work, work in our favor as well as the site's favor. And when you do come in with a much smaller project, you run the numbers and they just don't make sense. And that ties into sometimes why the assemblage and putting together all the parcels, which Mr. Nazaro and his team have worked hard on over the last few years to acquire all the pieces of this puzzle. Now we've got the finished product and we're presenting it to you with the hope that everybody on the board feels the same way that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? Not hearing anyone or seeing anyone, I'm going to turn to anyone for a motion, unless the applicant would like to add anything further.
Just want to thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, I would like to move, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Moriarty.
Okay. I would like to move to actually keep the hearing open for an additional 30 days for comment by the public. and reserve decision this evening. I would also like to weigh in and support Mr. Matamore's position that I strongly support the project. I think the architecture is great, and I think it's a significant upgrade to a site that's long been blighted.
Thank you. So there's a motion by Mr. Moriarty to leave the public hearing open for 30 days and reserve decision. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Frugieri. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we're reserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, members. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. We'll now go to item 6 on the agenda, Planning Board Decision Item, Todd O'Connell Architects, PB 2019-041, southwest corner of Jericho Street and Connecticut Avenue, East Islip, 270 Connecticut Avenue. Applicant requests a planning board special permit for a minor restaurant in the Business 1 District pursuant to 68-272.1A. Site plan modifications are also requested as part of this application. Good evening to the applicant.
Good evening. It's James Apka from Todd O'Connell Architects. I represent the applicant of 270 Connecticut Avenue, East Islip. So we're back here tonight after a first hearing a few months back, and we've been working with the planning board and Ms. Wozniak on some minor comments that we were addressing on the site. I believe we've addressed most of those comments having to do with mostly planting buffering, some parking, and the garbage refuge. Those were all taken care of. She did not respond with any other comments for changing. So I'm here tonight to address any questions that the board may have in regards to this application.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Ms. Wozniak for a report, and then we'll come back if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the public hearing, engineering has reviewed the concept site plan and determined that a site plan application will be required. The applicant has also updated the site plan to include the required buffer fencing, 1 row of evergreens along the western property line, and screening of the dumpster from Jericho Street. A buffer and landscaping relaxation will be required to memorialize existing conditions on site. In addition, a 35% parking relaxation will be needed. Although parking relaxation is high, the detached garage on site is calculated as 1 space per 200 square feet of GFA. The cafe has only 6 seats and it operates in conjunction with the yoga studio, so it's not likely it's going to become a destination spot. And therefore, based on the existing site conditions and improvements being made, planning recommends the board grant the application subject to the attached conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Wozniak. Any questions from board members? Have the conditions been signed and agreed to?
They have
We have,
not been signed. I believe they've been agreed to, though.
We have received the conditions. Currently, the applicant is stuck in California due to the situation with the COVID. She should be returning within a few weeks, and we will have those conditions signed and returned to the planning board.
Thank you. If there are no questions from the board and nothing further from the applicant, I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to close the hearing and not close the hearing, I'm sorry, keep the hearing open for the next 30 days.
It's a decision item, Mr. Brown. You just.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd make a motion to grant the item, grant the.
The motion by Mr. Brown to grant the application subject to the conditions. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bruno. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It's granted. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
Next item on the agenda, Town Board Application, Recommendation Item, Trek Bayshore LLC, CZ 2019-013, southeast corner of Union Boulevard, County Route 50, number 1700 and 4th Avenue, Bayshore, 1700 Union Boulevard, Bayshore. Applicant requests a change of zone from Business District to Downtown Development District in order to construct an apartment house consisting of 449 apartments. Site plan modifications are required as part of this application. I'll just note for the record that Ms. Cruz is recusing on this application.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Good evening to the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Appearing on behalf of the applicant, I assume you can hear me.
Yes.
Gene L. Nicola, 200 Railroad Avenue, Sayville, New York. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, This matter was heard by the board on November 14, 2019, at a public information hearing. Extensive testimony was submitted with regard to this project. Subsequent to the public information hearing, additional meetings were held with other groups such as the Bayshore Chamber of Commerce, Bayshore Lions Club, Bayshore Restaurant Association, and so forth. Additionally, meetings were also had with the chairman and the commissioner. Over 80 letters of support for the project were signed and delivered to the chairman and the planning commissioner. The project has been modified since the public information hearing to address feedback from the chairman, the planning commissioner, and the town's traffic consultants. The number of residential units, residential apartment units have been further reduced from 456 units to 449 units. The number of 3-bedroom units has been further reduced from 22 to 15, and the 5,000 square foot commercial space that was originally proposed has been eliminated. Now, if you may recall, the original application as filed was for 495 residential apartment units. So the applicant has eliminated 46 units, which equates 84 bedrooms since the original filing. The applicant has reduced the building height at the street from 5 stories to 4 stories, but it has maintained 5 stories on the interior court side of the building. The site will provide 629 parking spaces, and that was increased from, I think, 597 parking spaces, which equates 1.4 parking spaces per unit. The proposed development meets the density and dimensional regulations of the DDD zone. In fact, the DDD zone permits a greater density than the applicant is proposing. Its proximity to the Bayshore train station creates the ultimate transit-oriented development. Additionally, this $180 million project is transformative for the Bayshore Business District and is precisely what the heart of the downtown Bayshore district requires to perpetuate the financial revival of Bayshore, especially considering the current state of the economy. It creates a walkable community and provides the necessary mix of housing that is in demand today. Currently, the site does not generate any real estate taxes. This development will generate substantial real estate taxes for the town and for the school district. The stated purpose of the Downtown Development District is to strengthen the social and economic stability of the town's hamlet centers by improving the working, shopping, and living environment. And that is exactly what this proposal does for Bayshore. This is the development that downtown Bayshore requires, and that the Downtown Development District was designed and enacted for. New residents in the downtown Bayshore means pedestrian traffic to the business district. In fact, it is projected that these new residents will spend approximately $20 million annually within the town of Islip. A Class A multifamily building with extensive amenities, as proposed by the applicant, will be a tremendous boost for Bayshore. The applicant intends to comply with the proposed covenants and restrictions submitted by the planning staff, subject to the town board's approval in its resolution. If the board has any questions with regard to any specific issues, I have experts available to respond to your inquiry. This is a recommendation item, and that concludes at this time my initial statement, Mr. Chairman. If there are any questions, like I said, I have experts available to respond to the board.
I'm going to go to Mr. Colgan for a report, and then we'll come back for questions. Mr. Colgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was previously heard on November 14th in 2019. The primary concerns raised at that hearing were overall density, parking, traffic, and the height of the building. Since that time, the applicant has reduced the number of units by 6, increased the parking ratio to, increased the parking to a ratio of 1.4 spaces per unit, dropped the 4,000 square foot commercial component, relocated the entrance on 4th Avenue to be in line with the entrance of the upcoming apartment complex to the west, added a limited access entrance to 3rd Avenue, and pushed the 5-story component of the building within the interior to mitigate the appearance of the proposed bulk. The row of stalls along Union Boulevard would be land banked to add some greenery. These are all improvements over the site plan presented in November. The Division of Traffic Safety has noted that while the proposed layout meets IT standards for parking, that standard is significantly below the town standards with no nearby opportunity to address any spillover parking. The applicant will be providing off-street loading and decorative street lighting as amenities to meet the requirements of the Downtown Development District. Lastly, the applicant was seeking to provide workforce housing at 130% of area median income instead of the 80% prescribed by town code, which has been consistently applied in the Downtown Development District. The planning staff does not support a deviation from this. The proposed development is an opportunity to provide a transit-oriented residential complex and an expanded customer base for downtown Bayshore. The board is comfortable with the parking provided, then the application should be granted subject to the proposed covenants and restrictions.
Thank you, Mr. Colgan. Questions from the board? Mr. Bruno.
And let's take Mr. Colgan's last statement. If the board is comfortable with the parking. Wait, I am not. Mr. DiNicola, let me just go through some numbers from what we last saw and what we're looking at now. On the November 1st plan, there were 456 units, 685 parking spaces, which was 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and a gross floor area of 524,747 square feet. That's the last I saw. That's the one that was put in front of the board. Okay. Now, as you know, I have been very concerned about parking in downtown Bayshore. We've watched it over the years evolve. You and I have been around long enough to remember when BD didn't have a parking count. Okay, that had to be instituted, and public parking lots had to be put into downtown Bayshore to help it. Okay, most recently, meters have had to be put in because the parking intensity keeps increasing. This is an argument that you even made on the Southside Hospital parking garage, which I supported because I believe you are correct. There was a parking problem in downtown Bayshore. So let's see what your client did. So in the 5/20/20, you went down by 7 units, but you dropped the parking significantly down to 629 spaces. So you went from 1.5 spaces per unit down to 1.4. So the item I was most concerned about is the one you've gotten worse about. The gross floor area has only gone down by 8,000 square feet total on this project to 516,753. And if one considers that you're now deciding to land bank spaces because we complained that there wasn't enough landscaping. So the answer is, and I'm a little upset about this, is, well, what do you want, landscaping or parking? Well, my answer is, if you want the benefits of the code, things like 5 stories, I'm kind of expecting to see you respond to things that the code is requesting. And with your land banking, you're down to 1.28 parking spaces per unit. So I have to tell you, I'm not at all supportive of this on those bases. I love the concept of the project, but I'm saying when it comes down to this, I have significant concerns and have on numerous applications with parking in Bayshore. This is it's also a large number of spaces. It's one thing when the relaxation, when we're doing smaller, let's say smaller complexes with, let's say, only 20 spaces, and we relax it by 10% or 20%, because it's only a small number of spaces. This is not only it's a large project, which I don't have a problem with in concept, except that it becomes a large number of spaces that you're looking to relax. And I have to be very honest, I'm rather uncomfortable with where this is right now, because essentially the parking you're looking to provide on site is down to 573. Which is a 73% of the required out of the 1.75. And just as a general comment, I would say that your client, I think that people and your developer will develop as they choose. I'm not here to choose that for them. But I would say that I would start to think that while a pool might be a really great amenity, I'm starting to think that in downtown Bayshore, parking is going to become the amenity that people are going to be looking for. And I would suggest that Patchogue has gone further than Bayshore has at this point, and they are running into a problem with all the apartments they've put in because they can't rent them because of the parking. So I have very serious concerns about that aspect.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Ms. DiNicola, do you want to respond to anything? If not, I'll go to Ms. Frugieri. You're muted. Jean, you're muted. Jean, you're on mute. Ms. DiNicola, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I would rather have my traffic and parking expert address Mr. Bruno's comments. I believe that the reason that we put in some land bank parking is because we really don't need all of the parking that is required. We don't really need the 629 parking spaces based on the history of my clients' projects and how they're operating. However, is Mr. Winkleman available?
I am.
Dan, you heard Mr. Bruno's concerns and comments. Would you be able to address them?
Sure. So Daniel Winkleman, VHB Engineering, for the record, office at 100 Motor Parkway, Hauppauge, New York. As you're aware, we completed a very comprehensive traffic and parking study. We had a very detailed parking analysis, which analyzed the parking from several different aspects. We looked at it from town code perspective, we looked at it from ITE perspective, and we looked at it from actual parking counts that were done directly across the street at similar developments. All of the studies showed that in no instance was a parking demand of 1.28 exceeded. As you're aware, we're offering 1.4, and yes, a portion of that is land banked in order to preserve some greenery along Union Boulevard. But however, that is land bank parking, and it certainly could be built if required. The applicant also has 3 other developments where we have data from in terms of its parking occupancy. On average, of its 3 other developments, which some are not located as close to the train station as this one is, they have an average parking demand of 1.12 spaces per unit. So all of the data that we've collected, local data, ITE data, shows that we are going to have a surplus in parking. And given the fact that we want to preserve some greenery, it's our opinion that the spaces along Union Boulevard should be preserved for that reason. And however, they are there if ever needed. And if they were to be constructed based upon our studies, there would be approximately a 54 stall surplus in number of vacant spaces on site if they were constructed. So in summary, all the ITE data, all the local data, and 3 projects from that my client has demonstrated and constructed and are in operation today, which are all local projects, they all are operating below the 1.4 ratio that we are offering here. In addition to this, we also worked very closely with planning staff, in which we would derive the 1.4 ratio. The 1.4 ratio also took into account the fact that we eliminated the commercial portion of the project, which is what the relaxation from the 1.5 spaces to the 1.4 spaces units was derived. So given the workings with planning and all of our studies, we feel the 1.4 ratio will work well for this site.
DiNicola, anything further?
Let's see. I would like another individual to speak with, especially with reference to Mr. Bruno's concern about Patchogue. Mr. Louis Bukowski.
Good evening, everybody. Lou Bukowski, for the record, also VHB 100 Motor Parkway in Hopog. Just to add to what Dan said, and he can certainly add back on if he has anything else. The reduction in parking was in part due to the removal of the commercial component of the project. And that was many discussions with town planning to come to that 1.4 number. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But the reason I'm chiming in here is I wanted to talk a little bit about Patchogue, and we seem to at the previous hearing and tonight keep doing this comparison, rightfully so, between Bayshore and Patchogue, given their similarity in their thriving downtowns. But I think it's very important to highlight the differences, and especially in this idea that the parking in Patchogue is driven by all the residential. But the truth is the parking is really driven by the restaurants and the commercial use. And if you look at Bayshore versus Patchogue as far as total housing units, Bayshore has almost twice as many housing units in total than Patchogue. And if you look at multifamily specifically, as a percentage of those total housing units, you'll notice that Bayshore lags far behind Patchogue. Patchogue, for example, multifamily housing units being defined as 2 units or more, has approximately 44% of their total housing units as multifamily, whereas Bayshore has 27%. Now, even if you assume that this project is constructed, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but just including it in the numbers, you're still lagging far behind Patchogue at 32%. So it's a comparison that I think is very, very important. And if you dive deeper into this and you look at, let's say, Suffolk County Planning's data, which looks at apartment complexes of 10 multifamily units or more, you still stay very comparable with Patchogue, where post product construction, you would have 25% of your total housing units being in apartment complex of 10 multifamily units or more in Bayshore versus Patchogue at 23. So it's a very similar comparison, but it's important to note that the housing demographics are very different in the two hamlets.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Makovsky. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Bruno?
Mr.
Oh, those are answers, Mr. DiNicola. To be honest with you, no, they don't really satisfy me, but I thank the experts for their answers. I've had each semester I have a class that does multifamily houses that I teach, and I always have them go looking in Patchogue. And I have to tell you, while I don't disagree with Mr. Bukowski's statement about what's causing the traffic, what's happening is they're having trouble renting apartments in Patchogue because of the traffic. That's what keeps coming up. And so I'm saying that's why I pointed out. And it's taken so many years to get Bayshore back to where it is that I'm very afraid of creating a situation, the old Yogi Berra line, it's gotten so busy nobody goes there anymore. And I'm concerned about creating that in Bayshore. And with the volume of this project and the fact that I think we're getting to a point in Bayshore especially where we don't have excess parking. If the numbers don't work, I'm really concerned about what it does. So that's kind of where I stand with that.
I kind of almost take the opposite position, Mr. Bruno, that I have seen Bayshore in the dregs, and the super caution that may be exhibited by you, in your opinion, may create another problem for Bayshore, that it's missing the development that it needs to continue its, I'll call its renaissance, because certainly I've seen it in the 70s. You wouldn't even want to drive through it. Today, Bayshore is coming back, and this is the project that keeps it going and gives a spendable income to really support what a downtown is. We can put all the pretty brick pavers we want and all the pretty lights, unless you have people who have spendable income in a beautiful project, it's not going to maintain itself. And that's my concern, which is obviously the opposite of yours. In any event, at this time, perhaps I would like Mr. Coughlin, Bob Coughlin, are you available?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak when you get a chance. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can see.
that, Mr. Robert,
Mr.
Bob
Yes,
so would I.
Conklin was one of the principals of Trek Bayshore.
Sure. I just wanted to comment on the occupancy levels in Patchogue. I'm not sure that's completely accurate. We've never really dipped below the mid 90% occupancy range. We've continued to lease through the pandemic. We really haven't had any leasing issues whatsoever. There's more than adequate parking for the residential component of the projects. We have underground parking there that I'm not sure you're aware of, but there's more than adequate parking for the residential components throughout Patchogue. So if you look, actually the residential in Patchogue, if you want to compare the growth factors for the values of homes in the surrounding areas have escalated dramatically since our project has been built there. Relative to the rest of Suffolk County, it's been escalating at a significantly greater and faster pace.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Frugieri.
Mr. Chairman, I could fully understand Mr. Bruno's concerns about parking, but as overall parking in Bay Shore, but his point would be, I guess, more valid if we're talking about a restaurant or an apartment building where the apartments are relying on street parking. This is a totally different scenario where you have a luxury apartment community where the residents are relying and counting on having convenient, accessible parking on site. And we also have a situation here where we have a developer and an applicant with a proven track record. And they're not going to build a facility that's going to end up with a parking shortfall, because at the end of the day, the reality is that if they do have a parking shortfall and their customers have to drive around looking for parking, their tenants, they're not going to rent there. And the one thing about the rental business is that you don't rent just once. You have to rely on renewals. And if the tenants have problems with parking, they're not going to renew. So I think TriTech is a company that understands this. They have other communities around on Long Island that are very similar to this, although not identical. And I believe their parking ratios at those facilities are less than what's being proposed here tonight. This is also a very, very unique situation. This is the definition of a transit-oriented development. This is and this is exactly what the DDD zoning was designed for, this location and this type of use. This use is sandwiched between the train station and downtown Bay Shore. So it's a development that's not dependent on automobiles. People can walk to the train station. People can walk to downtown Bay Shore. They're not going to be using their cars as much, and they're not going to need cars as much as other developments and other types of uses would need. So I'm not as concerned with the parking situation here. I think 1.4 is a comfortable parking ratio to have for this particular development, given TriTech's proven track record and experiences in this business.
If I may add, Mr. Chairman, the Southside Hospital recently approved a six-story pavilion, which will bring in many high-paying positions in the medical field, technicians, and I mentioned this at the public information hearing, technicians, nursing staff, physicians, and the hospital is about, you might know better than I, 4 or 5 blocks to the west. So that's well within walking distance to the east. That's well within walking distance to this project. The hospital, Northwell, supports this application. There were another, I believe they submitted a letter in support of this application. So you have that facet also for again, a Class A building operation, which is, an additional housing facility that people will be looking for in Bay Shore with spendable income. So it's, I just wanted to make that point, that there will be that demand as well, and that that walking distance to work by, I think, many people that would be interested in renting an apartment in this Class A facility.
Thank you, Mr. Nicole. I'm going to go to, I believe, Mr. Matamore was next. You're still muted. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. I certainly understand Mr. Bruno's concerns, and he and I lived through many a project years ago that had those problems. But I think that Mr. Ferragiari's comments are right on, and I lived through with some pain the DDD coming in back in the 80s and 90s, and impact fees and a lot of things that came from California and that drove us crazy. But I think that the DDD was farsighted in the sense that the planners then and the town board then realized that the way to save Bayshore from its demise because of the big box stores was to bring in more dense population in downtown Bayshore. And that's what we're doing. That's why we're here. And frankly, the idea has only gotten stronger, in my opinion. The other thing, though, that we didn't talk about yet that I think is significant is the millennials are thinking differently than our generations thought. You always had to have 2 cars, but it'd be better if you had 3 cars. Well, the millennials don't feel that way. Many of them don't have any cars. I at my age, go to the doctors regularly, and I see the technicians. And one of them lives in an apartment above Larry Gargano's restaurant there in Bayshore. And the other one lives in an apartment up by the railroad tracks. And she walks to work every day. She walks to the urologist down in the east end of town across from one of our projects. Times are changing. And I think in the 80s, the board saw that. And many people will tell you, millennials are changing it. And they don't quite spend the money the way our generation or our parents' generation did. So I think that that's built into the thinking of the TriTech people. And I think it's creative. And I agree with the expert that I think it's going to be borne out. And not to say at a time with the COVID-19 situation that $180 million is a bad idea. It couldn't happen at a better time, and we don't have a crystal ball. So I would never consider walking away from that in an economic environment like that. So I think it's a strong application. I understand Mr. Bruno's concerns, but things have changed, and I bet him a beer that someday I think I'll win that bet, and I'll buy him a beer because I don't think it's going to be a problem. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore.
Chairman, I have a few questions.
We'll go to Mr. Moriarty, then I'll go to Mr. Brown, okay?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just picking up on one of the items that was mentioned in the staff report on affordability. Is it still the position of the applicant that they're not going to be complying with the 20% affordability requirement that the town has been historically imposing on development rent?
I'm going to defer to Bob Conklin. Would you like to
rental
address
projects like this, and I say that with the understanding that most. Well, let me just finish the observation, if I could. Requirement that we've imposed on every project that certainly I've been listening to and voting on since I joined the planning board. So to not see that from you or right down the block from you and not have it imposed on this applicant seems to be, unreasonable, unfair. Choose your words. So that's just my observation. I'd just like to have someone comment on that.
Well, let me just say for opening, I mean, this is a different kind of project, but we are ready to see how the town board renders its resolution, and we'll have to see how it goes at that time. We would certainly abide by the resolution of the town board and how they address the affordable housing situation. But I also would like to say that Bay Shore has 30%, or rough, I believe it's roughly 30% of the affordable housing in the town of Islip. And there are some projects in the town of Islip, in the hamlet of Bay Shore, that are 100% affordable. So I think you have to have a little bit of diversity in terms of the housing stock. And in your downtown development district, the ordinance says that deemed affordable. The words deemed, it doesn't say you have to have the ordinance, it doesn't say the affordable housing has to meet the criteria or the definition in the ordinance. It says deemed affordable. If you look at the general municipal law, workforce housing, 100% of AMI, and that is deemed affordable. So, you know, we have to create a little bit of different housing stock, and we want to have a project that is Class A, let me put it that way, with amenities, with something that's a little above and beyond for Bay Shore. I think Bay Shore is entitled to something a little bit more than just affordable. And this project does provide that. We have pools, we have a 47,000 square foot area, I believe, for recreation, for barbecue pits, for a walking trail, for fire pits. We have interior space for game rooms, bike repair. I mean, there are a lot of amenities which are not in other projects. Now, I believe Mr. Coughlin is willing to, wants to say something about that. And Bob, are you there?
I think so. I think if you can hear me, I think to directly answer Mr. Moriarty's question, we are agreeing to comply with the covenants and restrictions as presented to us by the planning board, which would include the affordable housing.
Well, there's your answer, Mr. Moriarty.
You're on mute, Mike.
So within the covenants and restrictions, there will be a provision requiring a 20% affordability.
Yes, that's been
Oh,
presented.
20% affordability, yes, absolutely.
So I'm just, can there be a clarification from what you said, Ms. DiNicola? So I heard a comment that you're seeking something from the town board, which would obviously be
No,
different.
no, whatever the town board approves, that's what we're saying. If it's in the town board resolution,
I think very
we will
simply,
abide by it.
we're agreeing to comply with the covenants and restrictions as presented to us by the planning board. I think it's, let's not.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Coughlin is making it even clearer.
We're agreeing at the 20% at 80.
That's what we have been presented with, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Brown.
Yes, well, that was going to be my question also, because wherever I go, people don't ask me for more housing, more housing projects. They ask me for more affordable housing projects, always. So that was one of the items that I wanted to speak to you about, but I think you addressed that.
Okay, thank you.
The other item, I'm still not happy because we got the drawings the other day. The renderings were beautiful that were sent to us. And I sent a note back to Mr. Colgan saying, is this true? There's only 4 stories. And all the different angles had 4 stories. And he came back to me, says, no, there's still 5 stories because of the design, but none of the drawings showed that. Now, I think that the area and the location for this is a great project for a great area to do the apartments. I still think it's large on the numbers, and I'm not happy with the amount of apartments at this. I don't like the 5th story. I just wish that wasn't there or in a reduced number. With that, I do think it's a good location for this project, whether it's TriTech or somebody else. I think there will be apartments there someday, but that would be my opinion with this.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So I'm glad to hear that the 20% affordable at the 80% of median is agreed to. My concern comes back to, and I wish I would have known this yesterday or the day before, because we could have gone back maybe and tried to talk about the number of units, as well as the parking that goes along with that. You know, I keep hearing mixed messages here. One that, you know, we're going to bring Bay Shore back, but then Bay Shore is hopping and moving along well. So, you know, it's sort of one way or the other. We're either there and we're sustaining it, or we need this project in order to build it up to make it be successful. But I just want to ask Mr. Colgan, I mean, the other concern I have with the size of the project and its location is the amount of other units we have coming on in that general vicinity that have already been approved by this board, and some of them probably been approved by boards prior to me being on the board, and how that impacts on downtown Bay Shore. And we talk about the traffic problems, but the traffic problems, yes, from the restaurants, but also the traffic problems from adding, you know, at this point, adding this development to that, probably 1,000 units, or therefore close to 1,000 new units about to come online in that small area. Sean?
Yeah, so currently, by the staff's estimate, there are 586 approved apartments waiting to be constructed. That does not include the proposal that's before the board tonight.
Thank you. So Mr. Nicola, one of the concerns I have is the size of it in relation to what's going into downtown Bay Shore right now. We're basically doubling a bunch of smaller projects that have been approved in that area in terms of creating traffic congestion and the like in the area. That also, the 6-story pavilion you mentioned going online. Mr. Nazaro has another project on Union Boulevard with a 2-story building that's going up. That's a large building. And there are a lot of other applications pending or that have been approved in the area. So that's sort of a concern I have there. The concern I have with parking, the way it is, and we can argue 1.4, 1.12, 1.75, or any number in between, would be the fact that we're short. And again, I showing the number again is 100 and how many spots are we short? Figure the 1.75. 156 spots, I think, is the number from doing quick calculations in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're short 156 spots. If we were short 30 spots, 20 spots, 50 spots, or something along that, which would be similar to some of the other projects that I even voted against that were at different parking ratios where there was a shortfall, you're looking at 40 spots or 50 spots or 30 spots. It doesn't have that much of a significant impact on finding parking in an area. Whereas if you're 156 spots short or a fraction of that number short, that is a significant number of spots to find somewhere else in an area that's already overburdened or that's becoming overburdened with parking. And that's sort of a concern I have there. I know we had a meeting and I asked for a reduction of units, and I thank you for going back and doing that, but I just want to point out you went from 456 to 449. So I'm not sure if that was truly a reduction or if I should be insulted by the fact that we dropped by 7 units on a 456 unit project after our meeting. And that's my concern. I like the project. I like something nice in the area. I've seen Tritex work around the county. I think they do very good work. I just think that the size of this needs to fit into what's in Bay Shore right now, what's presently coming into Bay Shore that's been approved, and a lot of those are already underway and been started, and it all needs to work together. The worst thing we can do is overdevelop the area and kill it. I can tell you, I used to go to Patchogue a lot on weekends. I very rarely go into Patchogue on weekends because I usually sit on traffic trying to get down Main Street through Patchogue on the weekends. But those are my concerns. I wish I would have known that the 2880 was agreed to a couple of days ago. I'd love to have sat down with you, or I'd still like to sit down and discuss with you other options. I think the 5th story, I know half of it's been removed, but the 5th story and the height of the building, I have concerns with. There are some residences across the street on 3rd Avenue that have been there for a while, and what the shadow would do to them as part of this is a concern that I have. Also as part of downtown development districts, I mean, it's sort of bringing the development up to the curb line. I do have a little bit of a concern on what we're doing on the Union Boulevard side. And again, it's something we could probably sit down and work through. Those are the issues and those are the concerns that I have going forward. I like the development. I like the developer. I think we need to look at this. I don't know the answer, and Mr. Pekowski, you spoke of this in terms of you were mentioning the number of multifamily developments. I don't know if they necessarily meant the number of units. And I don't know if anybody knows the number of rental units built as rental units in Bay Shore versus those that are in Patchogue in terms of number of units.
Yeah, actually, I can tell you that number
Can't
of
hear
units.
you. Hold on one second. I'm on mute because of Mr. Colga's in the same room. Go ahead.
I can tell you at a high level, it's about 1,900 units in Bayshore and about 1,350 or so in Patchogue. But again, it goes back to what I stated earlier, which is it's not apples to apples when you look at the total percentage of affordable multifamily housing as part of the entire housing stock. You're not looking at two areas that have the same number of housing units. And again, we're as a region behind the ball on the total percentage of multifamily housing that's really needed to meet the demand, which is closer to 35, and we're not anywhere near that.
And do you know if the 1,900 in Bayshore does that include this project and the ones that are coming online that I just mentioned, or is that?
It ranges, the data that I saw went up to 2018. It doesn't include this project. It includes everything from 1925 to 2018. It's what Suffolk County Department of Economic Development and Planning keeps for themselves.
Right. So, I mean, my concern there as part of this would be the actual gross increase in the number of more units coming on in a small downtown area. I know, Nicole, if you'd like to answer any of those. If not, I'll go to Mr. Bruno.
Well, what I think Mr. Bukowski has just answered your concern. Am I not correct, Lou?
Trying to.
Okay, yeah. I believe he answered it. I'd like to have Mr. Winkleman, before I go to Mr. Bruno, address the parking concerns that have been raised.
So yes, I heard two things that were actually mentioned. One in regards to traffic and one in regards to parking. So starting with the traffic, I understand your concerns with a lot of the other planned developments coming on in the area. But the traffic study did in fact take into account 6 other planned developments in the area. And those included many of the multifamily projects that you noted, as well as the Southside Hospital project. I am the traffic engineer working on the Southside Hospital project, so I am very familiar with the traffic it's going to generate. I was involved with making the recommendations for the parking garage there, so I also understand the parking demands in that area. This project it did take into account all those other planned developments, and the analyses showed that there would not be any measurable impacts to the area network and the surrounding intersections. So that being said, there are other uses on this property that would be as of right that could generate more traffic, and actually substantially more traffic than this project could. So taking that into account, this project would actually be a very good project for this site, given the size of the site, because there are other office uses or commercial type uses, such as a shopping center or a medical office building that could occupy this site, and they would generate significantly more traffic. Whereas this project is, as many of the board members have mentioned, is a TOD project. It's going to have less traffic demands than a normal multifamily would outside of an area where there's shopping and there's good transit. So it's my opinion that the project will not impact traffic conditions as much as some of the other projects that could be built on this site. Of course, they would have to go through a similar process. We understand that. However, just from a traffic generation point of view, there are many other uses that could go on this site that generate greater amount of traffic. In regards to parking, again, I've been involved with many multifamily projects across Long Island. I've also looked at data from my client on 3 of his nearby projects, and I have never come across a project, a multifamily project in close proximity to transit that has generated more than 1.28 spaces per unit. So I, in my professional opinion, am very comfortable with the 1.4 ratio we have here. I think it suits the property well. We want to preserve as much greenery, but provide the parking that it's going to need. So it's my opinion that this project is going to work well from both a traffic and a parking standpoint. If you have any further questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
I'm going to turn to Mr. Bruno. I would just, and I brought this up at our last public hearing, our last planning board meeting is just, I think the post-COVID world, in terms of people using public transportation, is going to be significantly different than the pre-COVID world. In terms of putting that many people, you can listen to the Long Island Railroad talk about a reservation system and other ways that they're not sure how they're going to accommodate people getting on in trains nowadays. So I think that's certainly going to have an impact as well. And my concern still relates to we're also displacing parking that was there on that property. I'm not sure how many spots for Fire Island ferries that were one time there prior to this project. So there's other traffic concerns or other things that may be added to the area in my concern. And then the number of units, I'm just calculations I just did with my phone while I'm sitting here. Sorry, Mr. Bernal, give me 1 second.
No, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Oh, why don't you talk about that? I'll come back ahead.
Okay, what happened was because everybody's been kicking around the number, all I wanted to say was I actually asked planning the other day for those numbers specifically because I knew it had to come up, okay? And just so everybody knows, there's currently right now 2,136 apartments in Bay Shore. There's 585 that are going to come online. So the total number, and again, it's another whole project worth. There's about 14 projects that have not been constructed yet, and it'll come to a total of 27, 21. So Lou, that was just, we were kicking around those numbers. I'm saying that's the latest numbers from planning, and that's as of 2020. So.
Yeah, and if I could just respond, Mr. Bruno, the numbers I gave on the 1900. So let me be more clear. Those were the Suffolk County data, right? So that's only multifamily units that are located within apartment complex of 10 units or more. The total numbers, if you want them, if you're doing a comparison of all multifamily, which is just 2+ units, it's in Bay Shore, which is not just the downtown, the entire hamlet, is 2640. Patchogue, for comparison, is 2510. So when after the project, Bay Shore is at 3,089. Again, multifamily is only 32% of the total housing stock compared to Patchogue, 44%. So those are census data numbers. And obviously planning is tracking things at a much more micro levels also. So
I just wanted to give you those numbers because we had them.
When you do traffic studies, that we talk about a lot of walking downtown. I don't know that there's a supermarket walkable or some of the amenities that you would assume somebody could walk to walk back to a unit like that. How do you account for things like that?
Oh, I mean, we look at the available data that we have, and it's based upon multitude of different multifamily sites. They don't give specific data in terms of the number of uses around. They talk about its proximity to transit primarily, and just like this project, there. And I agree, there is not a nearby shopping center, but there are very many other things that would help reduce the traffic generation or the parking generation. The proximity to restaurants. There's over 20 restaurants in the area. Obviously, we know about the train station. Those are all in very close proximity. So you're going to be reducing the number of trips substantially right there. It's not only shopping, and today's age, and it probably even more prevalent after everything we've been going through with COVID, is everybody's going to be ordering online and doing online shopping now. So we're going to have a lot more delivery services, which is, one vehicle with many deliveries coming into it, which would be the case with this development because of the size of it. It's not just going to be one person getting a delivery at a time. There would be probably multiple deliveries occurring. So I think we're going to see a lot of change after this, and a lot of good change in regards to traffic and parking. I understand your concerns with people using less transit. That may be the case, but there's also going to be a very large work from home force now that probably wouldn't have been if this didn't occur. I can say even from my own perspective, I'm working from home. Our company recognizes people work from home. Some people like it. There's some benefits to it. I could very well see a incentive to work from home for many employers on Long Island. So I think there'll be a balancing act there. We don't know what the future holds, but I think we're moving in a direction where both traffic and parking would likely be reduced outside the footprint of a site. That's just my opinion.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like Mr. Bukowski to give a comparison on the density with other projects. Would you be able to do that, Lou?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about a few projects that are recently approved in the immediate area. And it's a comparative as a number of units per acre. We're actually one of the lowest, not the lowest. Our density units per acre is 43.4 right now. If you look at the Village Place, they had 110.3. That's comparison. Gramercy Bay was 99.2. Also a 5-story project. North District Lofts were 50, and Bay Park Apartments 64.10, and Maple Avenue Apartments 52.9. I also say that from a FAR perspective, we're well under what the DDD requires of 2.0. We're coming in around 1.15. And just to address, while I have the floor, the question about height, we're committed to not exceeding the requirements of the DDD, which is 5-story and 65 feet off the top of my head. However, there is 4 stories along the prime street frontages on Mechanicsville, 3rd and 4th, and the 5 stories is only along Union and on the interior of the building.
Thank you. Mr. Bukowski, my concern is not necessarily the density of it. It's the sheer number of units is what I'm getting at. If you go back to the density on those projects, as dense as they are, if I ask you to recite how many units for each of those projects, I think it would paint a different picture. So the density is not my concern. The density of the total amount of units.
Purpose, though, of the downtown development district, Mr. Chairman, to have density to support the downtown.
Right.
And this project, you know, we're talking about post-COVID. This project is going to have an area for a work-at-home station, a large area, which is another amenity for people who will work at home. They will have a workstation area within the building. So this project is addressing modern concerns. I don't know how there's going to be people working at home, which is going to perhaps be less demand for public transportation, but the public transportation is going to have to keep up with sanitary conditions, which I believe the Long Island Railroad is working on. You may know better than I. You use it.
Used to use it, not anymore.
Yeah, there will be advantages and disadvantages, and this project was designed by the Downtown Development District. And what is the purpose of having such a district if you don't like the number of units? And this project is perfect for Bayshore. We can't have the 1960s thinking in 2020. The single-family dwelling and the people who want the single-family dwelling, they're not there. They want to put a key in the door and leave, whether it's empty nesters or whether it's millennials. You know, the expense of running a house today, it's very different. I think Mr. Manamore touched on that before. It's a different world with different people, and not the old homeowner.
Thank you. I don't disagree with you, Mr. DiNicola, that the purpose of it is to have the units down there. I think my concern is the amount of units that have already been approved. I mean, we just don't keep approving more and more units because we have a downtown development district. It still has to work overall for the area, for all the projects that have been approved in the area would be my difference on that. And the MTA has never been able to keep the trains clean. I'm not sure they'll be able to start doing it now, but that's certainly an aside.
Well, let me say this much. The applicant has done everything to, in my opinion, to make this a very viable project and very successful for Bayshore and the town of Islip.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, it's Bob Coughlin, thank you. It's obviously, it's in our best interest to make sure that Bayshore is economically viable and it's successful and it's thriving and it's vibrant. And that has been our MO, and our history speaks for itself there. We're very committed to making sure the community as a whole is successful. It's in our best interest. We've studied the demand of all the current and the proposed projects. Obviously, we're not going into this and hoping that investing $180 million just works out. We've spent a lot of time researching it. We're extremely confident in our research that we're going to be able to comply with it. I believe our experts have addressed the physical concerns and the concerns within the code. We're in most cases significantly below the requirements of the code. Proportionately, we're talking about a large number in absolute numbers of parking spaces, but it's all proportionate. If you're giving up 3 spaces in a requirement that requires 6, that's 50% reduction. We're not looking for a significant reduction by comparison to what other projects have received. So unfortunately, we do have to deal with some economic realities, and we're paying a significant amount of money for this property. It's a very well located property. The seller knows the value of the property. We're going to have to, whoever, whether it's us or somebody 10 years from us, because we will be involved for a while, takes us over, they're going to have a certain economic reality. They have to deal with a certain number of units. There's not room to cut the density by any significant amount. And to address the 6 units, we actually started with a proposal for 495 units. It was told to us 2 weeks before the first hearing that that wasn't going to fly with certain members of the board. We took it upon ourselves to drop the unit count significantly prior to the first application. So if you go back to our first plans, the first proposals were significantly higher. We've tried everything we can to address whatever concerns the board has. Hopefully we have. And obviously we have the extreme support of the community. Every organization we've met with has supported us. We have over 80 letters of support from local people in the community. We're not sure what else we can do to address the concerns. So what I've heard, without being derogative, is some of it's somewhat arbitrary. I don't like without some, if we can address a parking issue, if we can address a specific fact, we will try. We'll do whatever we can to make it work. It's very difficult for us to address feelings. So we will do everything we can to make sure that Bayshore is economically viable, and it's going to grow fantastic. And I believe that the community believes in us as well. So we're really asking for your support tonight. So I appreciate your time and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Sorry.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of talking about number of units, but what it really comes down to is the intensity of the use. And, what previous uses, we have to remember this was a methadone clinic. This was once a Department of Motor Vehicles, a very intense use on this site, and permitted uses that could, go there if this application were not to proceed, could be much more intense than the number of units, the residential multifamily units that are proposed here tonight. So, I think that this is a very good application and something that's exactly what Bayshore needs. I think the stores in downtown Bayshore need the foot traffic. I need the businesses along Union Boulevard need that foot traffic. And I think the number of units are appropriate for the size of the property, and they're consistent and fully compliant with the DDD code. If we, didn't want to support that number of units in downtown Bayshore, then we should really be thinking about amending the DDD code. But I think this is completely appropriate. And when I look back at the type of uses we've had on this site, this is what Bayshore needs. Many years ago, I represented the community of Bayshore sitting on the town board. And I went to numerous civic association meetings and Chamber of Commerce meetings. And people would ask me, when is Bayshore going to get something good? When is Bayshore going to get something besides a methadone clinic? Well, here's our opportunity. We're getting someone who's looking to invest $180 million into the hamlet of Bayshore and give the hamlet and the downtown area the boost that it so badly needs, especially in this COVID period where the local businesses, the small mom and pop shops are really hurting right now. They can use this foot traffic. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Any further questions from board members? The applicant want to add anything further?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time, consideration. We appreciate the board supporting this recommendation.
Thank you. That being said, is there a motion from the board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I like to, for all the things that I've said previously, this is the exact type of use and location of use that the DDD was designed for. It's a model TOD development. It's exactly what Bayshore needs with the putting the foot traffic on the streets. It's not automobile dependent, and it's a far less intense use than previous uses and permitted uses. And when we take a look at the site right now, we look at basically a sea of asphalt. And what this application is proposing here tonight is a nicely landscaped, beautifully aesthetic, and architecturally superior Class A luxury apartments. As I've said on many occasions, I think this is exactly what the hamlet of Bayshore needs. It's also what the town needs. Governments at all levels right now are hurting. This property is currently not on the tax rolls. Approving this application tonight puts a substantial project onto the tax rolls, brings a rateable into the town of Islip and the hamlet of Bayshore and the Bayshore School District. So I think it's exactly what the town and the school district needs. It also creates hundreds of construction jobs in a time where unemployment is extremely high. So with that, and for all of those reasons, I'm going to make a motion that we approve this application subject to the covenants and restrictions that we have before us.
Thank you. There's a motion by Mr. Frugieri to grant the application subject to the covenants and restrictions. I believe that's a second from you, Mr. Matamore.
Yes, yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Matamore. I will turn to a vote. There's a second to the motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Kevin, was that an aye?
Sorry.
You're still muted, Kevin.
Aye.
No, I got you, Tim.
Okay, I'm sorry. Kevin.
I take that as a yes. I can't hear you. Okay. So 3 in favor, all those opposed? So 3 opposed, it's 3-3. The motion does not carry. Ms. DiNicola, if there's room to work within this, I would make a motion to reserve to have another meeting with you and the applicant if that's not the direction you want to go, and I'll just leave it where it's at.
Why don't we do that, Mr. Chairman?
I would make a motion then, or I would ask for a motion to reserve decision. There's one by Mr. Bruno. Is there a second to that? Second by Mr. Moriarty. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, we're reserved, and I'm happy to get together with you and see if we can work through these issues, which are much less significant than the affordability issues that we were originally facing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DiNicola.
That is our last item on the agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Moriarty, second by Mr. Brown. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Adjourn. Thank you all. Have a good night. Be safe.
You too.